I looked at my friend's mom for just a second too long. I thought no one noticed, but she did. She didn't yell. She didn't look away. She just stepped closer and said something so calm. It made my whole world shift in that moment. The afternoon feels ordinary in a way that makes it even more dangerous, the kind of normal that lowers your guard without asking permission. The friend's house is quiet, filled with soft domestic sounds. A distant kitchen cabinet closing, the faint hum of a ceiling fan, sunlight slipping through half-drawn curtains and painting warm lines across the living room floor. It's the kind of space the narrator has been in many times before, familiar enough to relax in, familiar enough to stop thinking too much. That's the mistake. She is there. His friend's mother moves through the house with calm certainty, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but naturally receives it anyway. She's in her early 40s, composed, graceful in a way that feels unforced, like she belongs fully to her space and yet carries something quietly unreadable behind her expression. Nothing about her is loud, but nothing about her is easily ignored either. She's doing something simple, adjusting a cushion, picking up a small item from the table, moving between rooms in that effortless rhythm of someone who knows every corner of her own home. The narrator is supposed to be focused on his phone or the conversation he had earlier with his friend that has now faded into background noise. But his attention drifts. It doesn't feel intentional at first. Just a glance, a passing thought, then another look that lasts a fraction too long. He doesn't even fully realize it until it's already happened. She turns slightly, not fully toward him, just enough, and stops. It's not dramatic. There's no sudden music, no obvious reaction, just stillness. But somehow, that stillness feels louder than anything else in the room. Their eyes meet, and in that single connection, something shifts, subtle but irreversible. The narrator feels it immediately, the awareness that he has been seen in a way he didn't plan for. Not just looked at, but noticed. The difference is small, but it changes everything. His chest tightens slightly, as if his own thoughts have suddenly become visible. She doesn't speak. She doesn't smile. She doesn't look away either. Instead, she holds the moment, not aggressively, not accusingly, but with a calm patience that feels far more unsettling than any confrontation would have been. The air between them changes. The room is still the same, but it no longer feels empty. It feels shared in a way that wasn't true a second ago. The narrator quickly looks away, too fast, too controlled, the kind of movement that gives him away more than hiding him. He focuses on something meaningless, the edge of the table, the fabric of the couch, anything that isn't her. But even without looking, he feels her presence differently now. She resumes what she was doing after a brief pause, slow, unhurried, as if nothing unusual happened. Yet the moment doesn't disappear. It stays behind, like a quiet echo in the space between them. And in that echo, one thought forms clearly for him. She saw it, and she understood exactly that something had changed. After that moment, nothing in the room feels quite the same, even though everything looks exactly the same. The fan still hums. The sunlight still cuts across the floor in soft, golden strips. Somewhere deeper in the house, there's still the quiet rhythm of life, continuing as if nothing unusual has happened. But for the narrator, everything has shifted into a kind of careful awareness. She moves again. His friend's mother continues her normal routine. But now every action feels slightly more intentional, as if the space itself has become something she is quietly observing too. She doesn't bring up the moment. She doesn't acknowledge it. There is no correction, no embarrassment, no discomfort shown on her face. Instead, she behaves with a composed ease that somehow feels more powerful than any reaction would have been. That silence becomes its own message. The narrator tries to return to normal. He picks up his phone, scrolls without reading, nods at something he isn't paying attention to. But his awareness is no longer inside the conversation. It's fixed on movement, on distance, on her presence in the room. He becomes careful in a way he wasn't before. Where he sits now matters. Where he looks matters. Even how long his eyes rest on anything begins to feel like a decision rather than instinct. And that is exhausting. She passes through the room again later, this time carrying a small glass of water. Her steps are unhurried, balanced, almost quiet against the floor. She doesn't look directly at him immediately. Instead, she places the glass on the table near him with calm precision. The sound of glass touching wood is soft, but it lands heavily in the silence between them. Her fingers release the glass slowly. For a brief second, they're close, not touching fully, but near enough that even the smallest movement becomes noticeable. It's the kind of proximity that doesn't demand attention, but makes it impossible to ignore. Then she finally looks at him again. Not for long, just enough. Her expression doesn't carry judgment. There's no coldness in her eyes, no discomfort. Instead, there's something quieter, awareness without pressure, recognition without reaction. And that makes it worse, because it tells him she is not confused about what she saw. She is simply choosing not to make it loud. She moves past him after that, continuing her routine as if everything is still ordinary. But the distance she keeps now feels different. Not physical distance, but emotional spacing, like she has gently placed a boundary in the air between them without ever drawing a line. The narrator notices it instantly. And strangely, it doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like control, like she has taken the moment, understood it fully, and decided how it will exist between them. Quietly, carefully, without letting it spill into something messy or uncontrolled. He sits there longer than he needs to, still holding the weight of that silent exchange. Because nothing was said, but something was clearly established. And now, every second that follows feels like he is moving inside a space that she is also aware of, even when she is not looking directly at him. Evening settles into the house like a slow exhale. The light outside has softened into muted gold, slipping through curtains in thinner, quieter lines than before. The earlier tension hasn't disappeared. It has only changed shape. It no longer feels sharp or immediate. Now it feels patient, like something waiting in the background of every moment. The narrator notices that she hasn't avoided him. If anything, she is choosing proximity in a way that feels deliberate but never obvious. His friend's mother moves through the room again, this time without the earlier emotional charge of the afternoon. She is calm, composed in a way that makes it impossible to guess what she is thinking. She sets down a few things, adjusts a small object on the table, and then pauses as if deciding something internally. Then she speaks. Her voice is soft, not low out of hesitation, but controlled, measured in a way that carries more weight because of how carefully it is delivered. You seemed distracted earlier. It is not a question. It is not an accusation. It is observation, and that is exactly what unsettles him, because there is no escape in it, no angle to deny, no sharpness to argue against, just clarity. The narrator feels his chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that she has chosen this way of addressing it. Indirect, calm, impossible to turn into conflict. He tries to respond normally, but his voice arrives a fraction too quickly. I was just thinking about something. The words sound thin even to him. She doesn't react immediately. Instead, she studies him for a moment, her expression steady, unreadable in its restraint. There is no judgment in her gaze, but there is something more uncomfortable than that. Understanding without interruption, as if she is allowing him space to finish being uncertain. Then she moves, not closer in a sudden way, not invasive, just enough to shift the balance of the room. She sits nearby, on the same couch but not pressed against him. The distance between them is still socially normal, but emotionally it feels reduced. It's the kind of closeness that makes silence heavier, not lighter. She folds her hands lightly in her lap. Her posture remains relaxed, but there is intention in how she positions herself, as if she is no longer simply passing through the room, but choosing to stay within this moment. The silence stretches, not awkwardly, but densely. The narrator becomes aware of small things he didn't notice before. The soft rhythm of her breathing, the faint shift of fabric when she moves slightly, the way her presence seems to occupy space without demanding attention. Then she speaks again, quieter this time. You don't need to explain everything. The sentence lands gently, but it changes something internal. Because it doesn't push him to confess. It doesn't demand truth. It simply removes pressure, and in doing so, it creates space for something unspoken to exist without resistance. For a moment, neither of them moves. The room feels suspended, not tense in a breaking way, but balanced on a line neither of them is stepping over. She glances toward him briefly, then away again, as if deciding not to look too deeply all at once. And in that controlled distance, something begins to form that neither of them acknowledges out loud. Not confusion anymore, but recognition. Quiet, careful, and impossible to ignore. After her words, the house feels different again. Not because anything new has happened, but because something old has started to dissolve. The silence between them is no longer heavy in the same way. It has changed texture. What once felt like pressure now feels like space. Open, uncertain, and strangely safe in its uncertainty. The narrator doesn't fully understand why he feels calmer, only that the sharp edge inside him has softened. The need to explain himself, to fix what is unspoken, begins to fade. She remains seated beside him, not close enough to suggest intimacy in an obvious way, but not distant enough to feel detached. It is a careful balance, one that seems intentional now, as if she has quietly decided the emotional distance between them instead of reacting to it. Her posture is relaxed, one arm resting lightly along the back of the couch. She doesn't look at him constantly. Instead, she allows moments of silence to exist without interruption, as if giving permission for thoughts to settle rather than rush. And that, more than anything, changes the dynamic. At one point, she shifts slightly, not toward him directly, but into a more comfortable position. In doing so, her shoulder comes closer to his arm. It is not a deliberate touch, not yet, but the proximity becomes undeniable. The space between them narrows in a way that feels natural rather than forced. He notices it immediately, not with panic this time, but awareness. And she notices that he notices. That is the unspoken exchange. Neither of them reacts outwardly. No one moves away. No one corrects the position. Instead, the moment is allowed to exist. Her presence carries a kind of quiet steadiness. She turns her head slightly while speaking about something unrelated, something simple, domestic, ordinary, but her tone no longer feels purely observational. There is warmth in it now, subtle and controlled, as if she has decided the conversation no longer needs to stay guarded. The narrator responds, but more naturally this time. His sentences come slower, less forced. The earlier tension that shaped his every word begins to loosen. At one point, her hand shifts to adjust something on the couch, a cushion, a fold of fabric, and in doing so, her fingers rest briefly near his wrist, not touching directly at first, but close enough that the boundary between accidental and intentional becomes blurred. The contact, when it happens, is light, brief, almost insignificant in action, but lingers far longer in feeling than its duration should allow. She doesn't react to it, neither does he immediately, but something subtle passes through the moment, a shared awareness that neither of them interrupts. Her gaze lifts again toward him, slower this time, and there is something different in her expression, not a change in emotion, but a refinement of it, like understanding has replaced uncertainty. She is no longer observing him as something outside her awareness. She is acknowledging him within it. The narrator feels it too, though he cannot fully name it. There is no confession, no statement, no shift that can be pointed to and labeled clearly. Only the quiet realization that the space between them is no longer neutral. It is shared, and in that shared silence, both of them begin to understand something without saying it, that whatever this is becoming is no longer something that could be ignored the way it was before. The atmosphere in the room doesn't change suddenly. It deepens slowly, like water becoming still enough to reflect what was always beneath the surface. The earlier softness between them has settled into something more defined now. Not louder, not clearer in a verbal sense, but harder to ignore. Every pause feels intentional. Every glance feels weighted with meaning that neither of them names. The narrator sits quietly, trying not to overthink the calm that has replaced the earlier tension. But calm, in this house, no longer feels like absence of emotion. It feels like controlled awareness, as if both of them are carefully choosing what not to say. She breaks the silence again, but this time it is different. Her voice is even softer than before, almost blended with the quiet of the room itself. There is no build-up, no warning, just a natural continuation of something already unfolding. I noticed you. The words are simple, almost ordinary on their own, but the way she says them makes them feel irreversible. The narrator doesn't respond immediately, not because he doesn't understand, but because he does, too clearly. The sentence does not carry confusion or suspicion. It carries certainty, not about what he did, but about the fact that she saw him fully in that moment earlier and chose not to react in a way that would close the door between them. Her gaze meets his briefly as she speaks, steady but not sharp. There is no discomfort in her expression, no attempt to make him feel cornered. Instead, there's a calm acceptance, as if she is stating something already understood between them, something that no longer needs to be hidden behind silence. He feels his chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet weight of being acknowledged without judgment. She leans back slightly into the couch after speaking, as if giving space for the words to settle rather than press further. That small gesture matters. It signals control, not over him, but over the pace of what is happening between them. Then she continues, even quieter now, not explaining, not accusing, just observing aloud what has already been unfolding in silence. Her eyes drift away for a moment, toward nothing in particular, as if she is thinking more carefully about how far she wants to step into this unspoken space. When she looks back, it is slower this time, measured. The narrator realizes something in that pause. She's not confused about what she sees. She's choosing how to hold it, and that realization shifts everything internally. There's a subtle movement, then. She adjusts her position slightly closer, not dramatically, not enough to break boundaries in an obvious way, but enough that the emotional distance between them reduces again. The space that once felt safe in its separation now feels intentionally narrowed. He doesn't move away. That fact alone becomes part of the conversation. The silence that follows is no longer empty. It is layered, filled with what has been said and what still remains unspoken. Her presence feels steadier now, more anchored in the moment than before. Not intrusive, but undeniably aware of him in a way that changes how the room feels. And the narrator understands, without her needing to say it again, that this was not a casual observation. It was a turning point. Because once someone says, "I noticed you like that," calmly, without distance, the relationship between silence and truth is never quite the same again. After her words, the room doesn't return to normal. It settles into a new kind of stillness. It's no longer the silence of uncertainty or hesitation. It's the silence of awareness. The narrator feels it first in the simplest way. Nothing has changed outwardly, yet everything feels slightly rebalanced. The space between them, the rhythm of their breathing, even the way light moves across the room. It all feels subtly aligned around something unspoken. She doesn't continue explaining what she meant. She doesn't need to. Instead, she simply remains there, present in a way that feels more deliberate now. Not intrusive, not overly close, but undeniably aware. As if she has stepped into a shared understanding and decided not to step back out of it. The narrator notices her posture again, calm, composed, slightly turned toward him without fully facing him. It's a position that allows distance, but doesn't enforce it. That balance becomes more meaningful than any words could be. At some point, she speaks again, but it's about something ordinary. A small detail in the house. A passing comment about the day. Nothing that carries emotional weight on the surface. Yet the way she speaks feels different. Less guarded, more present. And he realizes that even casual words now carry a shared context they didn't have before. The earlier tension hasn't returned, but it hasn't disappeared either. It has transformed into something quieter, more stable. Like an understanding that doesn't demand constant attention, but never fully leaves the space between them. She shifts slightly on the couch, and in doing so, her shoulder lightly brushes against his arm again. This time, neither of them reacts. No pause, no connection, just acceptance of proximity. That small lack of reaction becomes its own language. The narrator becomes aware of how easily his body has adjusted to her presence, how the instinct to pull away has faded without being consciously decided. It's not comfort in a casual sense. It's something more layered, a quiet acceptance that her closeness no longer feels like something to analyze moment by moment. Her gaze drifts toward him again during a pause in conversation, not lingering too long, but long enough to acknowledge him without needing to look away immediately. There is something different in her expression now. Not curiosity, not hesitation, something closer to recognition. As if she has stopped trying to understand him as something separate from a moment they are sharing, and instead started understanding the moment itself through him. The narrator feels it too, though he cannot fully articulate it. There is no longer a question of what is happening. There is only awareness that something is already happening, and neither of them has interrupted it. The silence between them stretches again, but it no longer feels empty. It feels structured, like space intentionally left unfilled because it does not need to be. At one point, she adjusts something near him again, a small, practical gesture, and her hand briefly passes close to his without hesitation. No tension follows it, no second-guessing, just movement, just presence. And in that simplicity, something deeper settles. The narrator realizes that the most significant shift isn't in what has been said, but in what is no longer being resisted. The need to over-explain, to retreat, to interpret every moment as danger or mistake, it has started to fade. In its place is something quieter, a shared awareness that does not ask for confirmation. And in that awareness, both of them continue sitting in the same space, not as strangers reacting to a moment, but as two people who now understand that the moment has already changed them. The evening reaches its final stretch without any dramatic turning point. Yet everything that needed to change has already changed. The house is quieter now. Not empty, not tense, just gently subdued, like the world outside has lowered its volume for the night. The light has softened into a dim, warm glow that no longer draws attention to details, only to shapes and presence. The narrator sits in the same space as before, but it no longer feels like the same situation. What once carried uncertainty now carries familiarity, not the kind that comes from time, but the kind that comes from shared understanding. She is still there. His friend's mother doesn't try to reframe what happened earlier. She doesn't revisit the conversation, doesn't attempt to clarify or undo anything. Instead, she exists in the moment with quiet acceptance, as if acknowledging that some things settle best when left untouched. Her posture is relaxed now, more naturally at ease than before. One arm rests lightly on the couch, her body angled in a way that no longer feels guarded. There is no emotional distance being enforced anymore, but there is still grace in how she holds herself, as if balance matters even in silence. The narrator notices that he is no longer analyzing every movement she makes. That realization is subtle, but important. Earlier, every glance, every pause, every shift of position carried meaning he felt obligated to decode. Now, the meaning is simply there, not hidden, not overwhelming, just present. At one point, she adjusts slightly closer while watching something on the table, a small, ordinary movement. Her shoulder ends up lightly touching his again. This time, neither of them acknowledges it internally as a moment worth examining. It just stays. No tension follows it. No withdrawal. No hesitation. The lack of reaction itself becomes the clearest sign of how far things have shifted. A quiet rhythm forms between them. Not conversation, not silence, but coexistence. The kind that doesn't demand explanation to remain stable. She speaks once more, briefly, about something completely normal, something practical, unrelated to anything emotional. Her tone is calm, steady, grounded in everyday reality. And the narrator responds the same way, without overthinking it now. The emotional weight that once pressed on every sentence has eased into something manageable. At some point, the room falls into stillness again, but this stillness feels different from the beginning of the day. It no longer carries suspense or anticipation. It carries resolution. She leans slightly, her head tilting just enough to rest near his shoulder without fully committing to it. It's not a dramatic gesture. It's quiet, almost accidental in appearance, but emotionally deliberate in its ease. He doesn't move away. That choice matters more than anything spoken earlier. His hand rests naturally near hers, and after a moment, there's light contact, not grasping, not holding tightly, just the simple overlap of presence. Fingers close enough that the boundary between separate and shared space feels gently blurred, but not broken. Neither of them reacts to it, because at this point, reaction would feel unnecessary. There is no confusion left to resolve, no tension left to decode in real time. What remains is something calmer, an understanding that does not require definition to exist. She exhales softly, not as relief, but as settling, like someone comfortable enough in a moment to stop adjusting it. The narrator feels it too, a quiet emotional balance that doesn't erase what happened earlier, but holds it in a place where it no longer feels disruptive. The day does not end with confession or explanation. It ends with acceptance, not of everything, but of enough. And as the room remains still around them, both of them stay in that shared quiet, not as strangers navigating uncertainty, but as two people who have reached a point where silence itself has become a form of understanding.